Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am your host, Steve Jamison. I'm an author and mental health counselor. Are you curious about therapy? Do you feel there is a lot of mystery about therapy? Do you wonder what your therapist is doing and why? The goal of this podcast is to make therapy and psychology accessible to all by using real language and straight-to-the-point discussions. This podcast wants to remind you to take care of your mental health, just like you would your physical health. Therapy should not be intimidating. It should be a great way to better health. I will demystify what happens in counseling, discuss topics related to mental health, and discussions you can have with your therapist. I also want to introduce psychology in everyday life, as I feel most of our lives are enmeshed in psychology. I want to introduce the subtle and not so subtle ways psychology plays a factor in our lives. It will be my own mix of thoughts as well as special guests. So join me on this discovery of therapy and psychology. Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy, episode 29. My name is Steve Jamison. If you haven't listened to episode 28 yet, I hope that you take time to listen to it. I've had Jay on multiple times, obviously, but now having Caitlin join the fray and the dynamic was just amazing. I really enjoyed it. So I do hope that you take the time to listen to that very soon. But this week we have Jessica Jamison. Jessica is an LMHC and certified personal trainer who has numerous nutrition certifications. She has her own health and weight loss coaching business that she started last year as she pursues her dreams to educate individuals around health, fitness, and mental health. She is a wife and a mom who understands the daily struggles about taking care of yourself and your family. And she will share, hopefully, a lot of those tricks with us. I'm certainly very interested myself, so I'm hoping that she gives me a few tricks for me. I also have known Jessica for a long time, and I don't know if that's going to come up in the interview, but we'll see. So I do hope you enjoy it. Hi, and welcome to episode 29 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am Steve Jamison. I'm very excited because I'm meeting with someone that I consider a friend, a family member, even though we're not truly family. I mean, I've known your dad for 10, 11 years. I've been to your place for Christmas, New Year's. It's just great to talk to a friend when you're doing these type of podcasts. And I'm so happy to have Jessica Jamison, who is a licensed mental health counselor, on the podcast. Hi.
Hi, Steve. Yes, absolutely. I'm so excited to be here. I was thrilled when you invited me to be a guest.
Well, I've been wanting to talk about mental health because we know each other like friendly wise and like almost family wise, yet we don't really talk about your mental health and what you're doing too, which I think that talking about physical health is so important. So I can't wait to have this conversation because we always end up talking about kids and other stuff.
Yep.
And so really want to talk about you and your work right now. So maybe we can start off by you telling me a little bit about yourself and telling our audience about yourself.
Absolutely. So, yes, I am a licensed mental health counselor. I'm also a certified personal trainer. And I kind of like to say I am a therapist turned health coach. Even though I take a psychological approach to weight loss, I do not practice therapy with my clients. So, what I do is a little bit different. But I spent a lot of time in both fields. So I've been coaching in some capacity for probably about 7 years now. But I recently lost my own business in the middle of the pandemic, kind of, with everyone else.
Very common.
Because I'm also, I am also a mom and I could not find childcare during the pandemic for my son. So it was just the perfect timing for me to do what I always wanted to do, which was combine my education and background in mental health counseling with my just passion for fitness and nutrition.
It's very interesting because I always find it fascinating that people go from, mental health and physical health. And they always embrace the two eventually because we know how interconnected it is. So, it's always interesting to know where people came from around that. So how has your own life and maybe your struggles brought you to a point where you think about those things as a combined asset, so to speak?
Yeah, absolutely. I hope we have a lot of time here, Steve. So feel free to interrupt me.
I'm going to go get a coffee. I'll come back in a few minutes.
Yeah, come back because my story goes way back. I struggled a lot when I was younger with disordered eating and overexercise. And I don't even think until I was able to like heal my own relationship with food and exercise that I even knew what I was going through. Like I thought it was normal, right? Like,
Right.
as many teenage girls do. I had no idea that it wasn't and how unhealthy I really was. In high school, I severely restricted food and in a way that my family and friends, a lot of them honestly had no idea because I was good at it. And I got terrible headaches from under eating. I couldn't walk up a flight of stairs without being dizzy. I was put on hormone pills to get my menstrual cycle back due to being underweight. And, I was told that I'd have a hard time getting pregnant because of how I treated my body when I was younger. And that was 100% true. I did. So that is a real thing that when you're told that in high school, you're like, I don't care, whatever. I'm worried about that scale getting under 100 pounds. That's what I want. I don't care about my future kids.
Right.
So I really wasn't taking care of myself. In college, that was when it kind of shifted to over exercise, right? UConn had this awesome fitness center, and I kind of began to adopt the mindset of, well, if I just burn enough calories, I can eat whatever I want. So I would do hours of cardio a day, right? And no one knew. Like my parents didn't know that I would wake up at 6 a.m. before my 8 a.m. class, go to the gym for 2 hours, and then go back at 9 o'clock at night. No one had any idea that I was doing any of that. And believe it or not, though, I was at my like heaviest weight despite all that exercise because what I was doing was I was overworking my body and I was so fatigued. And then I would try to solve that problem with food
Right.
because I was so tired all the time. So then I would just eat and eat. And then I'd start that vicious cycle of, oh my gosh, I ate a bagel this morning. I have to go to the gym and burn that off.
The whole process of wanting to burn out food by working out is just it's a crazy concept, but it's something that
It is.
our distorted thoughts really bring us to.
It took me so long, Steve, to ditch that belief. And I always tell my clients now, I want you to exercise because you love it and it's something you enjoy. I actually do not recommend it for weight loss at all because we get stuck in that of like, well, I'm going to exercise so I can eat. And really exercise has so many other benefits that we should, focus on rather than how it's going to affect the scale.
Absolutely.
And I guess the rest of my story is kind of that transition of like how has exercise become like a really positive thing in my life. It was towards the end of college that I really got into rock climbing and also began living with a close friend who was studying strength and conditioning. And man, did I love what she was learning. Like I was just fascinated by what she was learning.
Right.
So we took a couple of nutrition classes together. We would go to the gym and lift, and she would like teach me everything she was learning in her classes. And I slowly began to like just ditch all of that excess cardio. And I spent my time on the tennis court. I spent my time in the climbing gym or in the weight room. And yeah, that kind of like sounds like a lot of activity, right? But what was different was my mindset. I was exercising because I wanted to be strong, not skinny.
Right.
I wanted to be a better climber than all the boys, you know, like I was like, what do you mean? Like, I can't do pull-ups like them. Like, hell yeah, I'm going to get there. So again, that meant, less time in elliptical, more time with the weight. And that was when I really got my confidence back. And that was what really allowed me to let go of a lot of the food rules that I had. So I truly feel, again, like you said, how is that physical health and mental health connected? When I felt strong physically again, my mental health is in such a better place. And to this day, I truly feel like two things changed my life. One was the rock climbing community because it made me finally feel like I was a part of something and I had the support that I needed, and strength training. And to this day, I absolutely love training teams because I think it's amazing what happens to their confidence levels when they begin to, recognize and honor their physical strength.
That was a mouthful right there. And
It
there's so
was,
many.
yeah.
I've got like 12 follow-up questions, but I'm going to try to
Awesome.
go under a couple of things. You talk about confidence, and I think that is absolutely key because when we focus on girls, especially under 18, but boys are the same thing, is
Hmm.
that the lack of confidence is what makes us have like what I would call body dysmorphia. I'm not diagnosing anyone, but we look at our
Yep.
bodies differently because our lack of confidence. How does someone really go from having that body dysmorphia to increase confidence? I mean, I'm sure that there's no pill. And just for the record, there's also not one session of 30 minutes that's going to change that. But
Yeah.
do you have any suggestions on how that could work, especially for teens? Because the self esteem is so difficult at that age.
Right. Yeah. I think it takes a lot of time. And again, we really have to work on both, again, both that physical strength training piece, but also mindset. So when I work with adolescent clients, we have to combine the two and, really teach them that like, because it can also go the other way, right? Like I've worked with some teenagers who feel really defeated because they're not strong enough to do what their friends do, or they're not strong enough to do what they think they should be doing. And that's when we really just have to take a step back and focus on their journey and their progress. And that's when we have to, really start small. So for adolescents or teens and anyone new to strength training or new to exercise, I always encourage you to start, really small. And that way we get those little wins right off the bat. And that's what keeps you going.
But not signing up for a marathon next week because I'm going to start working out today.
Exactly. Yes. You can maybe sign up for a 5K first, start training for that, and then move on to that half marathon and finally the full.
Right. And I agree. I sign up for the couch first, then I go 5K and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Maybe going with the couch first, learning how to go with the mindset. Because I think that you talk about confidence and it's also letting people in. I think that one of the things
Yeah.
that is so difficult for adults and children, adolescent children, is letting people in with your own struggles. Was there a point in your personal life that you let people in on all these difficulties that you had?
See, that's really tough. There was very few
This
people
is
in
a
my
hard
life.
hitting show. Just remember that.
Yes, there was very few people in my life that actually knew what I was going through. And if they did know, no one said a word to me, right?
Okay.
Because I mean, how hard is that to bring up? So maybe my friends and family knew more than they did, but if they did, they never said a thing to me. So I think it was the people that I was physically living with. So again, that the roommate who was studying strength and conditioning, who is still my very best friend today, she knew, my best friend from high school knew. But other than that, I went through most of the struggles alone. And I think that's why that community that I had with rock climbing really helped me because, again, it made me feel like I was part of something rather than feeling just so alone all the time.
And that's kind of why I wanted to kind of bring that up because being alone and all that is difficult. It's a hard question to bring up to anyone. Hey, are you overeating or having or disordered eating or you're working out
Right.
too much? What the hell's wrong with you? It's a hard conversation.
Right. And I would actually often get praised for it. Like there was a lot of people in my life who'd be like, "Oh wow, like weren't you just at the gym earlier this morning? Like good for you." In reality, it wasn't really good at all.
That positive reinforcement is hard to break, right?
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
that's the confidence. You get praise from other people, you don't have your confidence, then that
Yeah.
increases your confidence.
Right. So
So
I kept doing it.
right. And I think that it leads to the good question that that I feel goes with that too, is that how do we raise confidence so much, and what's the psychological approach to that weight loss in the sense that we're not thinking about getting praise from other people, but really getting it for self validation and not validated by anybody else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, it really depends on who I'm working with for that because I think a lot of people, might look and see confidence as very different things. Like for me, again, my physical strength always helped me feel confident, and other people might not care about that at all. So I think it's really understanding, what you want and what's going to help you feel confident and strong, or whatever words you want to use. And then going in that direction, whatever that might be.
Well, and again, just a reminder, we're listening to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I'm sitting here with Jessica. I'm Steve Bison. We're talking about mental health, working out, exercise, and the combination of the two, because that's what Jessica does. One of the questions that came up when I was listening to you right now is what you want. Because I think that sometimes what we want doesn't come from a internal locus of control. I don't want to bother everyone with psychology too much here because but it needs to come from you. When you get an external locus of control, oh, Steve, you're looking good, oh, you got up at 5 to go to the gym. But if I don't have a good internal locus of control, I give the power to everyone else. How do we
Yep.
shift that mindset?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think again that takes a lot of work. And I think I spend a lot of time with clients talking about the difference between that like internal and external control or motivation, whatever you want to call it. And I actually don't really like that word motivation.
Okay, tell me why. Tell me why. Why don't you like that?
Because what I mean, like I said, what is it? Right? Like
I don't know. This is my second language. You got to help me out.
motivate it fails us, right? Like motivation as it fails us. And it's because it's this ever changing, ever shifting thing in our lives. Sometimes it's external, sometimes it's internal. Like why is external motivation always a bad thing? Like it kind of gets a bad rep, but sometimes that's what you need to get you going until, like you said, you're able to make that a shift to internal motivation to keep you going in the long term. So I don't know. I always start with my clients with discipline, and
I like
then
that.
discipline comes first, and then motivation might kick in.
Well, I asked you that question, but I'm going to give you my point of view. And obviously I
Yeah,
turn to you as the expert. But from my perspective, motivation is wrong in the sense that we think about it as it's almost a perfectionist thing. You're not
yeah,
motivated enough, it's somehow your fault. And if you're
yeah.
motivated too much, that's again your fault. And it's almost like a perfectionist thing to have motivation, because there's days where I'll be up at 7 like today, go for a walk, clean the house, get ready for this interview, do a bunch of stuff. And then there's days where I look at the clock at 8 and I'm like, I could sleep another hour. And that's
Yeah,
not because I'm a faulty human being that I'm, quote, not motivated. It's just because we're different people on different days.
exactly. Talk about something that can affect your confidence is when you're feeling like that. Now you're saying, well, I'm a failure because I'm not as motivated as that other person is. So
Right.
definitely, absolutely.
So, yeah, I knew where you were going to go with motivation, because I remember seeing, and we'll share that in the show notes, because you have an Instagram and you have a TikTok and you talked about that. So that's kind of why I wanted to go there.
Yeah,
But yeah, I think that motivation is such a perfectionist thing, in my opinion, anyway. And I know that it's a very complex question to ask, but besides maybe discipline, is there other parts of our psyche that can really be improved to get to where we want to be?
I think discipline's definitely a big one. I think because a lot of time you're not going to be motivated, and it takes doing it anyways. Other parts of our psyche, I think consistency. If you're able to tap into that, that's huge for people because again, consistency is what's going to give you those small wins and increase that confidence and keep you going long term. But really, those are my two big things with clients. I think is and to do that, and I'm sure we'll dive into this later. We really focus on habit change. So understanding why you're doing what you're doing is a piece of it, but my big focus with people is what do you want to be doing instead? What do I care why? Yeah, I mean, I do, but what I really care about is how we're going to move forward and tapping into, what you want to see yourself doing instead and how to get there.
Well, we're talking about habit change, and instead of waiting a little later on, maybe we can talk about it. I know for me,
Sure.
the habit change that got me to running is not to have a personal best every single run.
Yeah.
that really changed my way of thinking. One of the things that I do with some of my clients who are people who work out or exercise, and I don't even like work out and exercise that much as words anyway, but they're like, oh well, this was a tough 5K, it was a tough half marathon, it was a tough day. And I'm like, well, it's the best you did on blank day at that time. That's the best you can do, and there was
Yep.
14 factors that played a factor. So that's one of the habit change I've implemented, not only in my life but when I'm talking to clients. Is there other habit change that you recommend or things that you work on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it all comes from what that person wants to change. But there's lots of different things that we can do. Yeah, and that shift that you talked about with exercise is one of them. And then there's a lot more that also have to do with food intake and eating. So with clients, I actually talk very minimal about like the nitty gritties of nutrition. And my focus is really on, again, what's behind the choices that you're making and what do you want to be doing instead. So in terms of like habit changes, we talk about how to set yourself up for success. So if you know that you're struggling with meal planning, like, all right, instead of saying like I'm going to plan my meal 7 days a week, how about we just get you into the habit of planning your breakfast 2 days a week?
Right.
And we build off that. Or an exercise example, if someone says, I want to get into the habit of exercising, okay, like what does that mean? And a lot of my clients will say, I should be exercising 5 days a week. Okay, great. How are we going to go from 0 to 5? What we're actually going to do is try to start with 1, right? Get you consistent with 1,
Right.
and set you up for success by, do we get you into the habit first of putting your gym clothes out every morning so you can see them? We get you into the habit of packing your gym bag at least. Whether you take the gym bag with you or not, at least you're in the habit of packing it beforehand, right? And again, it's about those very small steps to change those larger habits for the long haul.
And what I'm hearing about your habit change is that it's gradual, not
Yeah.
instantaneous. And I think that taking away that instantaneous gratification that we all seek, really,
Yeah,
to go for those small wins before you get the big one, as you said earlier.
exactly.
The one habit that I developed a few years ago, and I still do, and obviously there's no visual to this, but I grab a coffee in the morning, but I also grab a bottle of water,
Yeah.
just to kind of like balance out, so to speak. Is there small changes? I think water to me is when clients tell me, what should I change? Drink water. That's one of my first things that I talk about when we talk about changes, even in your health,
Yeah.
physical health. Do you have any other like small health tidbits that you would offer to people to just do minimal changes, just like the breakfast twice a week or anything like that?
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good one. So that's a concept that I like to call habit bundling, which is kind of like a cool way to like hack your habits, right? So you pair something that you already do with something that you want to be doing. So you already drink your coffee, but you want to be drinking more water. So now before you have your coffee in the morning, you're going to drink, that bottle of water or half that bottle of water. So that concept of habit bundling is a really great one to, again, start just making like those tiny little tweaks. There's lots of different strategies that we can use. And I think one of the biggest things is we also have to identify how our habits are serving us, right? That's the thing about a habit is it's an automatic thing that you started doing and then you keep doing it, you might not even realize. So we do something because it's serving us in some way. So we kind of have to break down what that is in order to change it. And the other thing when it comes to habits is you never just want to completely stop something. You always want to replace it. So like say you decided, oh, I want to give up coffee.
Never.
Right. I know, right? Crazy. Okay, but let's
Well, this is it. This interview is over suddenly.
over. We could use the example of like alcohol too, but that's probably another one where you'd be like, never.
I'm more accepting of the alcohol one than the coffee. I'll say that
a lot of
much.
a lot of people would be like, no way. But say you decided, like, I want to give up coffee. Okay. We have to think about replacing that habit with something else, because it's going to be a lot easier for you if you say, I'm going to replace coffee with tea for a little while, than it is to just be like, I'm going to cut it out completely and just like kind of like, quick cold turkey. So that's another really important strategy and part of the process.
Yes. And I think that the deprivation thought process is where the problem lies personally, because if you go, I'm going to stop coffee and you don't replace it with tea or water or gradually go down from, and I'm ashamed to say, but I have like 4 to 5 cups of coffee a
Oh,
day. Don't worry, I sleep fine. But going from 4 to 5 to going down to 3 by the end of next month
yep.
and doing it gradually. I think that that's when you talk about, the habit change, as the new year approaches, when this episode comes out, it's one of those things that I have a huge issue. I'll talk about it in my own podcast next week, but I think that might be very, very apropos right now to talk about it. Stopping suddenly or starting something suddenly
Mm-hmm.
never works.
No,
And I don't know
never.
if you have any own views on that.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And for the reasons that we kind of just talked about, again, like what you were doing or what you were not doing was serving you in some way. So why would you just completely just try to stop? There was a reason behind whatever that habit was in the first place. And we gotta seek to understand that. Otherwise it's not gonna be it whatever the change you're trying to making isn't gonna be sustainable. And that's what it's all about, right? Like, cool, like you gave up coffee for a week, great. But like, what about next year? Isn't that what the ultimate goal was to get you to give it up long term? So the sudden stop and starts, you're right, they never work. And that's what I see a lot of times with dieting and people who go on diets, is you get that sudden start and that sudden stop. And that just it leads to this vicious cycle that people get stuck in.
Sitting here with Jessica Jamison. My name is Steve Bissell. This is Finding Your Way Through Therapy. We're talking about a great subject here. And I think that a good transition here is a little bit of the connection between mental health and physical health, because I think that that's so intrinsically linked. I can tell you that when I work out, I might be physically tired, but in a mental way, I'm much more sharp. I feel much better.
Yeah.
May not be the first day that occurs, but eventually it gets that. Do you have any other connections with the physical and mental health that you find that are very important to think about?
Yeah, I mean, our mind and body, I think, are so much more connected than people realize, as you said. And in making the lifestyle habit changes that we've been talking about really goes a long way in boosting how we feel, both inside and out, both our mental health and our physical health. In exercise, and really, I think you said you don't love that term either. So let's call it movement, is often part of the treatment plan for depression, anxiety, right? Like, we know that. There's a reason for that. And as
Right.
I shared in my own story, strength training was what made me such a more confident person. So if that's not a perfect example of how our physical and mental health are connected, then that other side of when you're not fueling your body, you fit properly, right? You physically don't feel well. Your stomach hurts, you get headaches, you're low energy. Those are all physical symptoms. And then there's the other side of when you're not even proud of your food choices, you're frustrated with yourself, you're ashamed, you feel guilty. Of course, that's impacting your mental health.
I think another good point that you just brought up is shame,
Yeah.
and eating and not working out or exercising a movement or whatever you want to call it plays a huge factor. Do you want to talk a little more about how the shame plays a factor?
Yeah, it does. I think it really gets people stuck. And it's one of those things that like just breaks my heart to see people just beating themselves up for this kind of stuff. Because again, I truly believe that especially exercise should be something that you love. So, I always want it to be something that my clients want to be doing versus something that they have to be doing, because it's that I have to be doing this. And then when we don't do it, that's where those feelings of shame come in, and just, yeah, I mean, eating is the same way, like, who cares if you ate the donut or the cake or the ice cream? Like, it's, you care, right? Like, but most of the time people, it's not really a big deal. So we have to just find ways to just not make it a big deal.
And I think that the other thing too is there's so many things that came to mind when you were talking about that. When you talk about shame in particular, I tell people that what shame does is that it fuels more shame.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're shameful, so you're going to go and say, "Well, I need to feel better. Let me go grab that donut, that hamburger that from a fast food joint." I'm not trying to pick on anyone here.
Yep.
And then you get that sugar high for a second, but then you kind of still feel guilty for having that
Yep. All the time.
1,100 calorie blankety blank hamburger. So I think that that's the other part too. Is how do we combat a little bit of that shame fueling shame with people?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one, but I think my first step with people who are in that kind of cycle that you just talked about is we got to work on neutralizing food talk and ditching food labels. Like saying things like, "Oh, like I feel ashamed that I ate that because fast food is bad." Okay, well, maybe it wasn't really bad for you in that moment. Like maybe it was actually that kind of just like quick, convenient meal that you needed because you had a busy night ahead of you. And there's nothing to be ashamed for because you made that choice, because it wasn't really a bad choice in the moment. It was what you needed for your life that day. So, really, again, trying to neutralize the way we talk to ourselves about food, and ditching those labels again. And that can work for exercise too. I get asked all the time, well, what's good exercise? What's bad? What's better? And it's like, whatever you want to do, just move.
Right.
You don't have to be ashamed for whatever exercise choice that you do because it's different from someone else's. Hey, you're moving, and that's amazing.
It's one of the things that kept me from going to do yoga for years because it wasn't a dude thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really don't care anymore, and not trying to plug anything in particular, but I go to a hot yoga center not far from here that's really amazing. And
Cool.
they're very, very, very advanced. And none of them have they're like, "Oh, that's great. You're making efforts." And they've always been supportive. And I think that that's one of the preconceptions of we're working on your shame is to just show up.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
I think that that's the hardest part about mental health and physical health. I think when people just say like, "Oh, what are they going to think of me?" I have my own misconceptions about how I'm going to be seen in a group of people who do yoga on a regular basis. And I had not only my own physical health, but my own mental blockage about what are you going to think? Some guy with a shaved head and a goatee coming into yoga. Who does he think he is? And those are all the self-limiting thoughts that
Yeah.
we do. And I think that that plays a huge factor in what, and I also talk about the conditionals. I think that it's one of my episodes. I cannot recall which one, but I talk about if, but, try, could, should, would, and probably as being such deterrence to any type
Yeah.
of actions.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
When you talked about that, it really struck me. Neutralizing food talk is a very interesting subject too, because I think that that's the whole thing, right? Is that we kind of look at food talk and say, "Oh, hamburgers aren't good for you." Well, 12 hamburgers aren't good for you.
Right. Right.
One hamburger, it's not going to harm you. It's okay.
It's so situation dependent and person, it depends on the person. And it's hard though. A lot of people have a really hard time with it because we've grown up, like I definitely grew up in a family who labeled food. And it's so hard because like I see like even my mom doing it with my son and I'm like, no. Or using food as a reward, right? That's kind of under
Oh
that piece.
yeah.
Like we that is so hard not to do. But an exercise I always like to do with clients is if you write on a piece of paper, you write, my good food list, my bad food list, and just in the center, just write food, right? And see how many you can, my guess is that bad food list is going to be pretty long. But what is it? Really, it's food, right? It's just food. You're the one that's probably putting the label of good and bad on it.
That's probably a good visual for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it's one of my favorite exercises.
I follow someone on TikTok that is a certified dietitian. And as we approach the holidays, we're probably in the holidays as this is being released, but we're recording a little before that. One of the things she talks about is when you go and what food should you avoid at Thanksgiving? And she says, foods that you're allergic to
Yep.
and foods that you don't like.
Right.
Those are the two you should avoid. And she's like, no, you eat and you eat reasonably. And it's
Right.
okay if you quote overeat. You don't need to overcompensate by spending 60 extra minutes on the whatever cardio machine you like.
Exactly. I love that. I've heard that before too. I think it's perfect.
And I think that she's someone I really enjoy reading because there's so many people like, well, you should really avoid cranberry sauce. I'm like, cranberry is a fruit, a vegetable, it's fruit. I think it's a fruit.
Right. That's the perfect example of like cranberry sauce in your head. You're like, oh, what? That's a good food. It's a fruit that has a lot of nutritional value. But the person next to you who said that is like, no, that's a bad food. So like, who is making up these labels and where are they coming from? Something that we really have to think about.
Yeah, and I think that neutralizing that self talk about food is so important. Go back to a little bit of the personal stuff. Labeling food as good or bad is probably also something we all pick up from our families.
Yes.
And I'm not trying to this any family in particular, but how do we combat that so that we're at the Thanksgiving table and someone says, "Are you going to use that much gravy?"
Yeah, it's so tough because again, it's just part of like the diet culture that's out there, and we don't even realize what we're saying and the effect that it could have on someone. So just say nothing. I mean, honestly, like how about we just try that? Just don't comment on what people are eating and what they're putting into their bodies. Let them make the choice that they're making, and just pay attention to yourself. So I would just think, just don't like keep your mouth shut. Don't comment. Just don't comment on what people are eating, or I think even how they look. Because that can be kind of dicey too. And then if you are saying things or you're talking about food, you're making sure that it's that word neutral. I'm trying to think of some examples. Like with young kids, I try to teach families, instead of saying that cereal is bad for you because there's a lot of sugar. Okay, try saying something like, cereal is high in sugar, so it's going to give you a quick energy boost, but you might feel hungry a little while after eating it. So how about we have cereal and an egg? And so take a more like educational approach, because it's perfectly okay to teach kids about food. We just don't want to label it for them.
One of the words that I use even with my kids or even my clients is like anything in excess is bad.
Yeah. Right.
You know,
Yeah. Moderation. Exactly. Yeah.
you want that
That's
extra
what it's all
M&M?
about.
Take that extra M&M.
Exactly. Right.
Don't finish the 2-pound bag though. That's probably not a good idea.
Right. And teaching them why, like, okay,
Right.
because if you eat all those M&Ms, you're probably going to get a tummy ache after, and that's not going to feel very good.
And I'm going to take the other person approach. So you're talking about maybe not saying anything, which I think that a lot of people can learn and do that. But what about if you're, for lack of a better word, told that? I was going to use another word, but told is better. So let's say someone sits next to you and says, "You're really going to eat that?" How do we combat that? Because that brings instant shame to
Yeah.
a lot
Okay.
of people,
Gotcha.
especially if you have excess or very low body weight. That is very, very much a shame-based response when people say that. So how do we combat that from that perspective?
Right. Yeah. So that person, gotcha. That person is being told that. I think it's just, again, tuning into your body's needs. And I think you could even say that, like, I'm eating the mashed potatoes and gravy because I enjoy it and it fuels my body for the family football game we're going to play later. I think, and even just saying, well, I like it. It's a food that I enjoy, so it's okay for me to eat this.
I have a few choice words when people tell me not to eat something.
Yeah.
Starts with the letter F and rhymes with duck. But trying to keep it family oriented, trying not to get a little explicit checkbox next to my podcast here. Do you think it's also important to set that boundary of, hey, I don't really appreciate you commenting on what I eat. Maybe you should concentrate on you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you feel comfortable saying that, why not?
Well, it's family. You
Absolutely.
should be able to say
Yeah.
that. But worst case scenario, you see them once a year, and if not, you see them often. That means they respect you.
Yeah, I think exactly. I think, yeah, definitely communicating your boundaries is important for sure.
Because I'm sure that, if your husband ever said that to me, I think my choice words would be what I said earlier.
Right.
But I don't think he'd ever do that to me. So just making a joke here, but
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
stuff that we talk about. I talked a little bit about TikTok, and social media to me is the best evil thing ever. And what
So,
I mean by that is that it can keep you connected to people. It can make you feel less alone,
yep.
but it can also bring comparisons and very, very difficult situations. So, how much of social media and overall social pressure distort our own views of self?
Oh my gosh. I love the way you put that of it being like the most evil and best thing ever because I definitely feel that way. And I'm very new to social media. I didn't really use it very much before I launched my own business. And I'll have to be honest, I think I really had to check myself with my own behaviors because social media is definitely, for lack of a better word, I'll say the trigger for me, for someone who struggled with disordered eating and self image and body image for so long, because you're plastering your body all over the place out there. And it brought back a lot of negative thoughts for me when I started doing that in terms of comparing myself to especially other trainers and fitness professionals also out there on social media. And you don't really know that I might have tried that reel 1,000 times and recorded it 1,000 times before I actually clicked post. And so, yeah, there's just so much that goes on behind the scenes of social media that we don't know. So it's tough, and I feel my heart goes out to our youth out there for again social media being this such amazing thing in their lives, but also this means for a lot of comparison. And I think if for me, like what's helped me is knowing that people are probably going to judge me anyways. They're gonna judge me whether I post that day or not. They're gonna judge me whether my reel gets 3 views or it gets 3,000 views. That's just how people are. So why bother worrying about it?
It's a good point. I mean, I worked with someone for a while in a nonprofit in regards to social media and effects on teens. And one of the things that we talked about is be okay with yourself, number one,
Yeah.
and also know that the person that took that selfie took on average 13 selfies before
Exactly.
choosing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And sometimes they do it because they're not feeling good about themselves and they're looking for some of that external validation. And it's not necessarily their best day, and you don't know what the behind the scene is. So, do you find that some of the people that come and see you are kind of distorted by that social media and the social media pressure and pressure in general from social, like, a woman has to be, what's the new norm for quote regular women, 5'7", 130 and perfect
Yeah.
body.
Hmm.
And I'm making that up. I have no clue what it is, but
I don't
I
even
think
know.
it's
Yeah.
just crazy. I just think it's crazy personally, but
I don't really know either because I don't care. But yeah, I think a lot of my clients aren't big on social media. A lot of them use it, but they're not. It doesn't, consume their lives. I more see that with the adolescents that I've trained over the years. They come into their session and they're like, "Oh, Jess, I got to show you this video on whatever platform it is." But I mean, social media or not, we're still comparing ourselves to other people that we see every day, whether it's on a Facebook post or in the grocery store. So no matter what, we really have to work on that.
yeah. And I think that that's why, like, a little bit of the next question that I wanted to ask you is the dreaded BMI.
Yeah.
To me, the worst thing that ever existed on the medical front was the BMI.
Yep.
I'll give you my views afterwards, but what are your views of the BMI?
I don't love BMI. I don't use it as a qualitative measure with clients. It's not a measurement that I'm taking. I ask people their weight and their height, but I don't calculate BMI. My knowledge of BMI comes with obsessively calculating it for myself in high school and college, right? Like I would literally sit on my computer and I would Google BMI calculators and I would try like different ones and like be like, oh, like that one's like a point different. And, like, oh my gosh, like, why is that number coming up different? Or I play around and I put in a heavier weight and a lighter weight and see what the BMI number was, which is obviously not healthy,
Right.
not good. And I think we were talking about it, before recording, because I lift weights, my BMI is on the higher end. It's still normal, but it's on that very high end of normal. And it's because, I have a lot of muscle mass. So weight, BMI, we have to be careful. I think some people respond really well to measurements like that. Like some are they're numbers people. And I'm not against that. If someone really wants to track, a client of mine really wants to track those things, I'm not against it, but we have to really take a deep look at the meeting, behind those numbers, and make sure that it's not becoming this like unhealthy obsession, and that we're focused on other measures of progress as well.
Like I said before the recording, if I really was in my normal BMI, most people would come over and look at me and say, Steve, are you okay? Are you sick? What's going on? You look like you're
Yeah.
dying.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that BMI has created such a distorted view of what our weight should be and what it should look like overall. And I've always encouraged my clients to, how do you feel? Like you may
say that. Yep. How do you feel?
You're 5'7", 150, but how are you feeling?
Right.
I'm feeling good, or I'm feeling healthy. I just don't like the number. And I'm like, it's a number. See, I swore.
Exactly.
I knew it would happen. At the end of the day, I think that's what I tell people, is that isn't our health our own view of ourselves and how we feel?
Yeah, absolutely. I get that question from clients all the time of like, well, what should I weigh? I don't know. Well, we have to see how you feel along the way, right? Like my focus as clients is never really the number on the scale. I mean, yes, I call myself a weight loss coach because that's what people want, right? That's what the ultimate thing that they want, is to lose weight. But it's really, as we talked about today, about so much more than that. So as we're actually losing weight or inches or whatever, we're always talking about, okay, how do you feel? How's your energy? How's your hunger? How are you sleeping? And just really try to focus on more things like that, in learning how to tune into how you feel.
I balance out a lot in my book, and in general with my clients. I talk about the mind, body, spirit connection, and how, your mind and your body and your spirit are all connected, and how if you balance that out the best you can probably feel a whole lot better about yourself. And do you have any recommendations in regards to how to perceive slow progress? Because I think that's what people struggle the most with. It's like, I didn't, I've had clients who've had, stomach stapling and, stomach sleeves, and they lose 28 pounds in a month, which is awesome. But, there is, they can't eat. There's a lot of like pain. There's a lot of different things that go with that. And I don't know if I recommend that to everyone. I certainly recommend it to those who need it. But how do we see, like, oh crap, I lost 2 pounds the first week, but the second week I lost no pounds? How do we kind of like combat that?
You're right. That's so tough for people, because they want results fast, because that's what we see a lot. We see TV commercials with people losing 20 pounds in a month, or again, it's plastered all over social media, these weight loss programs that get you these crazy results crazy fast. And that's just not a reality. And it's not reality because it doesn't really work in the long term. So taking it back to, any progress is good progress. What are the wins, no matter how small they are? How, and if you didn't make the progress that you wanted to make, how come, and how can you learn from it? How is that going to help you moving forward? Because that's learning too. That's another form of progress. It's just maybe a little different than the one that you had in mind. And I also do a lot of work with clients around, your goal this week was to lose 2 pounds, you lost 0.2. Are you happy? Like, can you sustain the 0.2 that you lost? Like, did you maybe you had ice cream this week and you're finally seeing like, oh, like, I can eat something I love and enjoy and the scale didn't go up. That's a huge win. Again, another sign of progress.
And I think that that's always important to see that progress. Again, listening to Jessica Jamison with Steve Bisson here, finding your way through therapy. One of the things that I get very annoyed with in regards to the progress that people make and when they're looking for sudden stuff, I don't adhere to any particular diet type, and I'm not going to put down any of them. I will put them all in the same category of garbage
Mhm.
in the sense that we all have to have our own kind of nutrition plan in order to do so. So, what do you say to someone that says, well, I just did that? Those stupid cleanses just drive me absolutely bonkers.
Oh,
I
no.
did like a pancreas cleanse or whatever they call them. I'm like, yeah, that's what your pancreas does. That's what your liver does. How
Right?
how do we
Yeah.
how do we combat people who may have those thoughts and they're like, I lost 10 pounds drinking only apple cider vinegar? How do we combat those individuals who like they saw the result, but they're like,
Yeah.
how do we combat those thought
I
processes with
I
people?
think I'm all for meeting people where they at. And honestly, if someone came to me and said, okay, Jess, like I really want to try this cleanse, I'm probably not going to talk you out of it. Chances are I'm going to let you do it and then, see for yourself that it would probably not was the best decision for, X, Y, and Z. Um, because if I try to, you're not gonna, you don't care what about you've already got in your head that you're gonna do it. So I can't change your mind necessarily. But I think it goes back to, well, did it get you the results that you wanted? And were you able to sustain it? Do you want to continue living your life every month doing a cleanse? Or would you rather find a way to just find balance to achieve the health goals that you're after? And a lot of times it takes people a while to come around, and it's no fault to them. Again, that diet culture is so out there. And it's until we find a different way that we don't realize what we were doing to ourselves and how it really wasn't working for us.
I think you said, the psychological standpoint of meeting people where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's a very good point. I'm not known to hold my tongue, so even if my clients say I'm going to do a, whatever cleanse that comes out, I'm like, how's that going to help you? But how do we meet individuals where they're at? Let's say, for example, someone's struggling to find out that to try to get more movement on being careful, being mindful of what they're eating, and turns out that they may have had a psychological trauma or they're
No.
struggling with major depression disorder. I'm just or postpartum depression or what have you. How do we kind of like move that conversation from this is not about food or exercise, but it could be about more of your mental health?
Yeah, and I said when we started, I am a licensed mental health counselor, but I am not doing therapy with clients. That's for someone else. And a lot of clients that come to me, they need to do the work that you're referring to first. Health coaching would be that next step for them. But I'm not doing something like, I'm not processing trauma with clients. So I'm very focused on how to move forward. Yeah, I mean, I care about your past, but
So do you recommend that they go to a therapist or anything like that?
depends. It really depends. And like I said, I will be honest with someone if they come to me and I don't think they're the right fit because they might need therapy first or in addition to health coaching. Again, they're different, right? Like health coaching has its foundation in therapy, but they're different. So yeah, I think we have to be really careful, and I try to be really careful about that, making sure that someone gets the right support if really they're not ready to dive into food and exercise habits quite yet, because there's some deeper things that they need to work through first.
I think that's a great message to give that sometimes you got to do a deep dive into your mental health. That doesn't mean you don't do health coaching at the same time,
Right.
but you're like, I know you don't do the trauma work, but certainly like, maybe perhaps you need to go see a therapist to work on how you were perceived physically by your ex in regards to your weight or
Yep.
something like that. That's not something I do, but I can send you to Jane, John, Frank,
Exactly.
Jamie, whatever. I think that that's important because I talk about that at the beginning. One of my first sessions is always like, when was your last physical? And if it's not within the year, I want you to go get your physical because I don't want to diagnose you with a mental health issue when it's maybe
Yeah.
low sugars or hypothyroidism. I certainly share that in my book too, in regards to that. My ex-wife who had a hypothyroidism issue. At the end of the day, I think that giving the right person is so important. And I think that you have a combined mental health background with a health coach, but concentrating on one thing and finding someone who does the other is
Exactly.
also
Yeah,
important.
exactly. For sure.
So now that we've heard all the great things about you as we wrap up here, how can people reach you to maybe connect about health coaching or anything
Yeah,
else, or maybe even just to consult with you?
absolutely. My email and DMs are always open to people. I love hearing people's stories. I really do. That's why I became a therapist in the first place, was because I just love hearing people's stories. So absolutely, feel free to reach out. I am mainly on Instagram at revolution_HC. I'm also on Facebook. You can find me, I think it's at Jess Revolution Health. And then all of my social media links are on my website, and there's where you can contact me. There's contact form on my website as well. That's probably the easiest way to reach me, and that's revolutionhc.com.
All right, I'll put that in the show notes for sure, so that way people know how to reach you. And you do virtual?
Yes, my entire business is virtual, personal training
Great.
and health coaching.
Because I don't want anyone thinking that you're restricted to Massachusetts, but they can reach
No,
you from
yes,
Hawaii, Brazil, Europe, and make sure that they know that you can be reached that way.
absolutely. Yeah, that's it was a huge shift for me to go from in-person coaching to virtual, but it's really opened up so many doors in that regard, and I can reach so many more people.
Well, time flew. We already kind of did a full hour. I can't tell you how much I appreciate the conversation. Gave a lot of good information. I think that there's going to be a whole lot of people who are going to find this very helpful. So thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Steve. This was a lot of fun.
Well, this concludes episode 29 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Jessica. I certainly did. Learned a lot about health and nutrition, as well as finding ways to think about our working out or doing movement, as we talked about, in a way that is much more palpable for a whole lot of us. So I hope you enjoyed that. Episode 30. I can't believe I'm episode 30 already. And this will be from the new year. And we're going to talk about resolutions and why I don't really believe in resolutions and how we need to reframe the thought process around that. So I hope you join me then. Please like, subscribe, or follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for information, educational, and entertainment purposes. If you are struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor or therapist for consultation.